Welcome back to Movies Outpost. Today we'll be diving into yet another Scott Adkins special titled Legacy of Lies. Enjoy the recap. In Ukraine 12 years ago, an operation of the MI6 was underway when Agent Martin Baxter was surprised to see his wife, Olga, amidst the dangerous situation. Somehow gaining control, Martin had managed to grab the files they were supposed to save. Unfortunately though, Olga being shot at and held at gunpoint had compelled him to surrender to the Russians. Haunted by the memory of that fateful day, Martin is now in London with Lisa, his 12-year-old daughter, who advises him about facing his boxing opponent. While she makes a bet against her father, the match begins with Martin facing Richie May, the preferred winner. Richie May employs a lethal combination of well-placed punches and kicks. An overwhelmed Martin counterattacks with a series of punches of his own, while being reminded of Lisa telling him to use his legs if he had to win. However, a few brutal bashes from Richie May knock Martin out, leading to a loss. Having won her bet, Lisa tells Martin that she knew he wouldn't listen to her. They have a minor quarrel the next morning, with Lisa insisting upon settling in London and finally starting school at the end of summer. On the other hand, Martin believes that they needed to keep moving instead. Later that evening, Martin is getting ready to leave for work when he catches the news about a homicide attempt on a Russian opposition activist and his wife, who were found unconscious in NYC's Central Park earlier. At work as a club's bouncer, Martin is approached by Sasha Stepanenko, who urges him to speak to her later. In a while, two armed men gain entry from the back door even as Martin makes his way to Sasha, telling him that she heard about him from her journalist father, Igor. She shows him a picture of Igor and his colleague, Olga, with Martin. Having taken up her father's mission, Sasha then asks for Martin's help in recovering the lost files. Noticing the gunman just then, Martin rushes Sasha to safety before skillfully taking them both down with their own weapon. After dumping the weapon, Martin heads home only to find the front door open. Relieved at finding Lisa peacefully asleep in her room, Martin continues further, till he finds two MI6 officers, Trevor and John, waiting for him. Having quit after the Ukraine operation, Martin is under no obligation to tell them about his conversation with Sasha, but is intrigued when Trevor mentions the files as well. Unable to sleep, Lisa joins her father just as Trevor reminds Martin that the files with the Russians could finally reveal who betrayed them all those years ago. When he asks Martin if he isn't curious about who is responsible for Olga's demise, Lisa is shocked because she has been told that she lost her mother in a car accident. Once she angrily stomps off, Martin asks Trevor and John to leave as well. He then finds Lisa crying in her room and apologizes for keeping the truth from her. By himself that night, Martin thinks back to the good times he shared with Olga before thinking about the day she was taken from him forever. Lisa wakes up the next morning to find Martin packing all his things. Seeing her awake, he asks her to pack as well. Later, when he goes down to shift some of his bags to the car, however, he is attacked and abducted. Presented before Tatiana later, Martin wonders why even the Russians are trying to find the files, considering they had them already. To ensure Martin's cooperation, Tatiana reveals having kidnapped Lisa, which forces him to agree to contact Sasha for the files nonetheless. In consultation with the Kremlin, Tatiana demands to get Sasha along with the files within the next 24 hours. Martin's race against time to save Lisa begins when he is unceremoniously dropped home. He promptly gets into his car and is closely followed by John to the Maximilian Club. Martin spots him just as he makes to follow him in and clarifies that he does not wish to work together. Heading inside, he meets Maxim to inquire about Sasha. Having found Maxim's card in Sasha's wallet, Martin had realized that Maxim had directed Sasha to him. While Martin looks through Maxim's phone, security is discreetly called for. Never one to be taken by surprise, Martin reacts well to the threat and saves himself before shooting Maxim and the other security guards who step in. As the club empties, more security shows up and Martin expertly makes his way through them. Leaving the club, he gets into his car while Tatiana witnesses Lisa's expert knowledge about boxing. With Maxim's phone, Martin tracks Sasha's location and promptly heads over. After destroying her phone to ensure that she isn't tracked by anybody else, he tells her of his intention to help her. Sasha informs him that she wishes to publish the files to avenge her father's demise and says that the last entry in his logbook mentions a meeting with Red Star. This meeting was the operation that went astray, but what Martin doesn't know is that it had to do with evidence of a chemical weapons program of the Russians. Sasha adds that Red Star had not only obtained the formula for this nerve agent named Novichok, but that she even had samples, and it would have been too risky to bring the files along for her meeting. She had kept them hidden in a safe deposit box at a bank in Kyiv, which is why the Russians do not have them either. Sasha says that she is the only one who knows the bank's location now, since she burnt Igor's logbook. However, what she doesn't know is the code for the safe deposit box, for which she says she needs Martin's help. Elsewhere, one of Trevor's men, Burns, frees John, who was tied up by Martin, who just then reaches the hideout from where Trevor was conducting his work. Holding the tech employee there at gunpoint, he gets him to look for Operation Red Star in Kyiv. Amidst multiple photos of the operation, Martin spots a handwritten note in Olga's hand which is now encrypted. However, Trevor's arrival with his team means that Martin doesn't have the luxury of time to decrypt the code. He asks for everything to be printed, and when Trevor gets there, Martin announces having a hostage. Sending 2 men down the escape route, Trevor leads the rest of his team back out, only to find the IT guy on his own. Martin had smartly hidden himself, but Burns soon finds him. Pretending to surrender before strongly knocking Burns out, Martin then faces John as the two engage in an intense match. Martin attacks without scope for respite, but he has found a well-matched opponent in John who refuses to give up and keeps returning with more vigor every time he gets hit. Eventually, John subdues Martin even as Trevor arrives with the rest of his team. However, Martin pushes off the window with John and immediately rushes to the car to be driven away by Sasha. One morning, they arrive at an abandoned location where Martin immediately begins to decrypt the code, only to realize that he cannot figure it out as the key regularly changes. Noticing Trevor and his team outside, Martin quickly grabs Sasha to retreat deeper inside. He then appears in front of Trevor with his hands raised in surrender while Sasha holds him at gunpoint. She announces that only Martin knows the code of the safe deposit box, but Trevor does not seem to believe her. Changing the plan then, she points the gun at herself, saying that nobody knew the location of the bank other than her. Martin's shock convinces Trevor of Sasha's honesty, and he lets them escape. He then heads back to the hideout and checks the decrypted version of the photograph, meaning that he is really the only one who knows the code now. Meanwhile, knowing that Burns will be following them, Martin gets a few skater kids to drive his car around to throw him off. He is at the airport a while later with Sasha just as Trevor finds out that she has booked 2 tickets to Moscow. Not willing to believe this, he gets the IT guy to keep looking for them since he does not expect Martin to travel under his real name. Meanwhile, Martin calls Tatiana to inform her about the files being in Kyiv and asks for more time. Tatiana warns him of the consequences of trying to trick her and lets him speak to Lisa for a while before snatching the phone away. Lisa criticizes her behavior later by saying that she wouldn't have been so heartless if she had been a mother. This irritates Tatiana, and she tries to instigate Lisa instead. When the girl does not give in, Tatiana abruptly leaves. Meanwhile, CCTV footage from the airport shows Martin and Sasha on their way to Kyiv, causing Trevor to issue an instruction to contact a certain Colonel Zelenko in Ukraine to be on the lookout. Martin and Sasha's arrival at Kyiv is meticulously photographed to be reported ahead. When they rent a car, it is closely followed till Zelenko sees the two of them reach Igor's residence. Once inside, Martin notices being watched from across the street when Sasha brings his attention to the Russian ambassador, claiming that their chemical weapons program ended in 1992, reminded of Olga repeatedly telling him to avoid getting too personal during a mission. Martin thinks of Olga's fate while his curious daughter asks Tatiana the truth about her mother's demise. Initially reluctant, Tatiana eventually gives in and tells Lisa that Martin tried to save Olga from the dangerous situation she found herself in, but she was unfortunately shot. The next morning, Tatiana arrives in Kyiv with Lisa. Not knowing that his daughter is in Kyiv because he let Tatiana's call go to voicemail, Martin and Sasha head over to the bank. With full knowledge of being watched, Sasha makes her way into the bank and asks to access the safe deposit box. After proving her identity, she is taken to a security check before arriving at the vault. The bank employee provides her biometric for the vault's door before inviting Sasha to enter. Instructing her to insert her code, the bank employee exits the vault, and Sasha immediately calls Martin with directions to her location. Having spotted Trevor with Zelenko in the lobby, Martin is satisfied that their trap worked and he promptly makes his way to join Sasha. He knocks out the security personnel before firing at the emergency alarm, and while it blares through the bank, Trevor makes the bank employee lead them to the vault. Meeting Martin in the vault, Trevor is held at gunpoint and urged to enter the code. He stalls for time but eventually opens the safe deposit box. Sasha finds a small case in it with samples of Novichok, and they proceed out of the vault, still holding Trevor at gunpoint. Leaving Burns and the rest of the team behind, Martin, Sasha and Trevor take a side door to escape, where Martin soon knocks Trevor out. The two then continue towards the roof and make their way across the building even as Burns follows with his team. Martin and Sasha are spotted as they go down a ladder, and Martin gets shot while running towards their car to make an escape. They are closely followed by the police as they flee but soon lose their tail due to a crash. Checking his wound later, Martin is relieved to see that he is only grazed by a bullet. Pouring a bit of alcohol onto it to sterilize the wound, Sasha suddenly pulls her gun on Martin. He tries to reason with her by telling her about Lisa being kidnapped by the Russians, but Sasha rejects to believe him and ends up shooting him before escaping with the car. When he gains consciousness a while later, he speaks to Tatiana and lies about being successful in his mission. Demanding to speak to Lisa, he gets emotional upon hearing her voice and urges her to remember that he loves her. Lisa notices the strangeness of the situation just as Tatiana grabs the phone and makes plans to meet Martin later that night. Martin then calls Trevor for help, and while Trevor negotiates the terms of his assistance, Martin thinks of the rental car that Sasha took off in and hurries over to its office to track its location. Learning that the car was parked at the central train station, Martin heads over and eventually spots Sasha waiting for a train at the platform. She notices him approaching and makes a run for it, but tumbling down the stairs in her haste allows Martin to finally catch her. Knocking her unconscious, Martin steals a car from the parking area and makes his way out, still haunted by Olga's voice urging him to focus on what is right for their daughter and their mission. Meeting Tatiana later, he sends her a link to a video stream that clearly shows the Novichok samples and Sasha. Saying that the relevant files are inside the case, Martin demands for Lisa in return for Sasha's location. Tatiana gives her bracelet to Lisa and says that it belonged to her daughter before releasing her to Martin. Upon receiving Sasha's location, Tatiana dispatches half her men there while continuing to watch the video stream. Making sure it is the right time to attack, Martin signals a hidden Sasha to begin shooting from the opposite side while he gets Lisa into the car. Fierce fire is exchanged before Sasha eventually runs out of bullets. Her attempt at remaining hidden fails, as she is soon caught and held at gunpoint by Tatiana. Martin is now faced with two difficult options: either give up the files to save Sasha or sacrifice Sasha to reveal the truth about the Russians and avenge the demises of Igor and Olga. Choosing to save Sasha, Martin walks up with the files towards Tatiana, but seeing him draw his gun, Tatiana shoots him, getting Sasha to surrender. Tatiana is poised to eliminate her when she is surprisingly shot. When Sasha looks up to see her savior, she sees Lisa, who has decided to support her father's choice. Sasha quickly grabs the files and begins helping Lisa with Martin, but stops when Trevor arrives and demands for her to surrender. To avoid getting caught, Sasha jumps off the bridge with the files. A while later, Martin is recuperating while held in custody, where Lisa visits him one day and tells him about her life with her new foster mom. After telling Martin about her gambling winnings with Tatiana, the two then speak about Olga's demise, thereby reinforcing their bond. She then heads over to meet Trevor to give him a copy of a letter that contains the name of the double agent that he has been looking for, and warns him to ensure Martin's safety in return for the original letter. Outside, she reads the original one she received from Sasha, who decided to thank her for saving her life by giving her the name to safeguard herself. Eventually, Sasha publishes the files to reveal Russia's reality and urges the international media to stand by an objective truth to ensure that history does not record lies. Elsewhere, Martin and Lisa run a vegan snack bar where Sasha visits one evening. Her arrival is promptly reported back to Moscow, seemingly hinting at something sinister. Thanks for sticking until the end. I honestly would like some critique or criticism, so feel free to chuck it in the comments below, and as always, have a great day.